Hello? 1, 2, hello. We like to invite you all to come in and find a seat. Those of you who wish to partake in this feast of words. Yes, thank you. And we have about 7 people who are going to read tonight from books, but we also have some other guests who we'd like to introduce you to and invite you to look at their work. We have Holly Harman from Ben Lomond in the back with her books and some, is it t-shirts? Something, yeah, right. And we invite you to there. Her work is for sale, and Jami and Rado and Carolyn Cassady, thank you, all right, are in the back, and they have books to sale relative to Neil Cassady and his wonderful goings-on, who, you know, he was one of the seed core inspirations, or inspirator, or maybe just radical, at the beginning of our whole thing back in the 60s. Prior to that, even 40s, God, with Kerouac raging across the country. Well, our books, there are 5 of them. They are a compendium, an accidental compendium of remarkable stories from the Santa Cruz area by a mosaic of incredible individuals who were either directly involved in all kinds of wonderful mischief or accidentally dumped into it and had some stories to tell around it. We're going to read from all 5 volumes. I'd like pieces, different little pieces, and we could probably get it all done in about an hour and 20 minutes and have time left over to talk. And exchange whatever we want. The volumes 1 through 5 at the end of this reading will be available for free to anyone who wants them. However, if you feel inclined to offer a little donation into the pot, the $1,000 pot we're watching sink into the sea, that would be welcome too. I brought a little drop in the ocean. And I'm trying to drop it to everybody here before it's over, so thank you. Why not? Bloody place. Onward. So first, I'd like to start, since Volume 5 was the volume that we really didn't have a chance to showcase due to the COVID problems, I'd like to read just a little part then from the last book, and because it's just a scattering of peoples and times, there's no time thing. It doesn't all start nicely. Well, it starts nicely back in the 60s, but then it's scattered all over from that point on. There's no more actual order. So this one is from a gentleman who introduced me to a whole lot of mischief in Santa Cruz. His name was Marcellus Barnes. He was from New York City. He hung around with Richie Havens and Gina De Valenti, and Bob Dylan and folks back in the Greenwich Village days. And he was one of the dancers in a magazine called Eros, which you may recall. There was a huge obscenity trial that came down around Eros. It was because there was a male black dancer, Marcellus, and a girlfriend of his who was a model in the area, and they'd been hired to do modeling for the gig, so they were modeling dancing. It's the most subdued and proper kind of stuff compared to what's coming down today. I was surprised that they even bothered to take it to trial, but they did and lost, thank God. And meanwhile, but it was a little warm back east, and so Marcellus decided to move to California and see what that was like, and sort of leave town for a while. And I just have a couple of quotes of his here, how he came to it. He first arrived in the Holiday Lodge in Ben Lomond, and that's what Holly's dealing with in the back. And he says, I arrived there with a drum slung on my back, sat down on a tree stump and started playing. The party got longer, and I kept on playing until one day went by, and 2 days went by, and I'm still playing. And by the 3rd day, it had started to calm down. People were tired, but everything seemed to meld. And they said to me, well, you're one of us now. You don't have to go anywhere else to go, so you're stuck here with us. And I said, cool. I found a home at last, at least for a few months. Those were like juicy times, with everyone playing music, having fun, tripping out, meeting new folks, the old ones, the young ones, the baby ones, the naked ones, people of all sizes, colors, language, It didn't matter. We were all together. We cooked together, ate together, slept together, and took care of one another as we learned to forage and garden and share the spiritual aspects of our lives. Because it was a learning experience, everybody was learning at a rapid rate, and the community itself was somewhat taken aback by what was happening. But everybody kept going forward. That to me was the essence of growth, and I was happy just to be involved. Then I discovered there was also an intercommune connection. So I decided to check out other communes. And so he starts moving around. But anyhow, that whole idea, also remember that there was a crucible we all came out of that was so explosive, literally explosive, with atomic and hydrogen bombs. And in the 60s, they were still dropping those suckers out of the air and blowing up places, including in America. And the mothers had to march against radioactive crap falling into the waters and polluting the cow milk and breast milk and on and on. I mean, it started a whole lot of revolutionary things, which were all part of what was triggering us in our search, in our own awakening. Oh, I didn't mention it, but yes, also LSD had arrived on the scene. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. And it was spreading rapidly across the country. And Santa Cruz was one of the distribution places. Anyway, that's all I want to do for now. I may read a few more clips in between, but for our second reader then, some of these are going to be quickies. I think little pieces from a lot of different stories, and some of them will be longer from the pieces that the people want to read longer. So the next reader then is Jack Bowers. He has an appointment to make, so away he comes. Thank you.
All righty, thanks so much, Mike. I was got a video from a friend of mine in New York, and it was Judy was reading The Cat in the Hat to her grandson. And it reminded me of how, I read The Cat in the Hat probably 50 times to, or maybe, 1,000 times to all my kids and my grandkids and everything. And, that the stuff from the past is implanted in us, and we carry it with us as we go forward. And I think that's, the recent Ogunnuki gathering that we had really reminded me of that, of how much we hold that's right here with us and very, very, very present. And I think that's one of the beauties of this book, or this set of books, is that it reminds us of that we're not merely our present, we're all of that. And of course, that reaches back into generations too. So anyway, I'm not going to go too far because Mike gave me very specific instructions, and I always follow direction. Well, not always, but sometimes. Oh, right. Yeah. Let's see. Ogunnuki. April 23rd, we had our reunion at the Kumbuan. It was a wonderful event, and it was so wonderful to see those of you who were there. Let's see. George Davis and Jack Bowers got there first, and this is at Haverford College back in Philadelphia, outside Philadelphia. We lived across the hall from each other, and soon we were picking bluegrass songs together. George on the banjo, Jack then playing guitar. Tim Ackerman was the school's only rock and roll drummer, and George traded the banjo for an electric guitar to play in a band with him. When Bob, a serious violinist with credits at Juilliard, came to Haverford, he roomed with George's younger brother. George taught Bob that a violin could also be a fiddle and introduced him to the fine art of fiddling. A friend of George's in New York needed a band to record, and George rounded up a couple of folks from the band he was playing with, as well as myself and Tim, and we made a record called The Federal Duck in 1968. And that was really what led to Ogunnuki later on. One of the people who was in the band Federal Duck was Dave Barry, the humorous columnist out of Miami. Let's see. Oh, yeah. As a band, Ogunnuki brought diverse musical experiences to the group. Bruce Fry's music was strongly rooted in the acoustic blues tradition of Mance Liscombe, Mississippi John Hurt, and Muddy Waters. He's also a songwriter with a strong melodic sense and an intelligent lyric sensibility. Tim had grown up playing music and listening to music in New York. As a teenager, he heard Jazz Grace on 52nd Street. Bob was a classically trained violinist, performed with the Juilliard Orchestra. In college, he took up the electric bass. On electric violin, he was able to meld the formidable classical technique with bluegrass repertoire. George Davis continued to evolve a unique style on the banjo by electrifying his instrument, somehow accommodating the styles of Eric Clapton, Ravi Shankar, and Earl Scruggs all at once. Let's see. When Ogunnuki arrived in Santa Cruz in September 1970, there were very few local bands, but no music scene to speak of, and hardly any musicians made a living wage. The George Davis Trio played the Whole Earth Restaurant at UCSD several times. Ogunnuki's debut as an official professional band was at a benefit for Cesar Chavez at Merrill College. It was in the fall of 1970. Next breakthrough came a few months later when the Ogunnuki played a concert at UCSC's athletic field, supposedly featuring Crosby, Stills, and Nash. When the headliners failed to show, the local musicians averted a near riot by turning the disappointed audience onto their own particular brand of music. Was anybody there at that event? There you go. Yeah, it was a crazy night. The fog came in, and it was, somebody had conjured up this idea that Crosby, Stills, and Nash were going to perform, and got everybody on board. And it was us ourselves, and Bahia Brunel was another headliner there. Just a wonderful songwriter herself. The Ogunnuki Farm, the band's communal residence, was composed of the band members, a core group of family and close friends, and a rotating cast of visitors, men, women, and children. For most of its history, the commune had 15 stable members. In addition to the band members mentioned above, the core group was composed of Bella Fry, Consuelo Berrigan, Jessica Fry. She's now the associate director of the Carrillo Music Festival, by the way. Maria Lucinda Lucy Garcia, Acacia Fruit Garden, Diana Troxel, David Bowers, Adriana Troxel, Candace Halverson, Courtney McGuire, and Jeanette Walsh. The commune, let's see. Had many distinguished visitors. This is just a little transition to the other article, including people from the HISCON program. That's one reason we arrived in Santa Cruz, is because Tim, the drummer, had been accepted into the HISCON program. So we came up here, and so he was there. And Nobby Brown used to come up to our potlucks on Sunday nights at the Ogunnuki Farm. And somebody else we met through there was Carlene Faith. Anybody remember Carlene? Yeah, Carlene. And this is the transition into the other article I have in the series here, which is about the Prison Arts Project. The William James Association is covered in another volume. I can't remember which one it was, but there's a fine article by Paul Lee. Yeah, volume 3. Thank you. And this edition here is about what to me was the most powerful thing that came out of the William James Association. And there are a lot of wonderful things that came out of it. But the one that was most powerful, I think, was the Prison Arts Project, which goes on to this day and is something that I've been involved with since 1980. The formation of the William James Association in 1973 by Page Smith and Paul Lee provided the base from which the Prison Arts Project grew. It should be noted that from its outset, though, the William James Board had a substantial component of practicing artists: Roy Rydell, Francis Rydell, Al Johnson, Mary Holmes, and indeed Page Smith himself. Precedent for the Prison Arts Project exists in the work of the UCSC History of Consciousness graduate student Carlene Faith. In the 70s, as part of her graduate work, Carlene taught a course at Soledad Prison that included prisoners and UCSC undergraduates. Her book, Soledad, University of the Poor, documented that work. From there, she formed the Santa Cruz Women's Prison Project, which for 2 years brought distinguished teachers to the California Institution for Women in Frontera. The on-campus presence during the 70s of Black Panther Huey Newton, another HISCON graduate student, clearly created a context in which incarceration and the gross social inequities in our society were a part of the campus conversation. So I don't know what there was a wonderful memorial for Carlene. She moved from Santa Cruz up to British Columbia and was a professor there at the University of British Columbia, I believe. And when she passed, which was, I guess that's 5 years ago, something like that, there was a wonderful memorial for her at the down at the Center for Nonviolence. And that's when I really realized that, these ideas have come out of Santa Cruz, a lot of great ideas. And I think that's wonderful that you point that out. Midwifery, I think, is one of them. One of those ideas that not has just existed in our culture here, but has gone on, has really gotten legs. And the other one is the Prison Arts Project, which started as an idea. Actually started as a meeting between Eloise Pickard Smith. Well, let me pick this up where this is here. Okay. Oh, here we go. Eloise Pickard Smith, Page Smith's wife and a distinguished artist herself, was appointed to the first California Arts Council in 1976 by Governor Jerry Brown, along with Rusa Sawa, Nora Purifoy, and Peter Coyote, three really distinguished artists. As these members of the Arts Council toured the state to assess the state of arts in California, Eloise discovered an arts community in the California Medical Facility, a prison in Vacaville. An inmate-led arts guild and performing musicians guild demonstrated that the arts were alive even in the depths of our prison. To nurture this community of artists, Eloise resigned her position on the Arts Council and used the William James Association as a nonprofit channel to collect funding for the nascent Prison Arts Project. Eloise's partner in this work was a visual artist, musician, and prisoner at Vacaville, Vern McKee. Vern said of Eloise, "Without Eloise, there would be no program at all. If I looked inside the prison walls and found the need and hunger for this program, Eloise looked outside into the future and the strength, courage, and wisdom to give it life and make it grow." So Eloise, she created an amazing thing. Let's see, 2-page.
One of the books.
Oh, right, yeah.
Prison Poetry Project, called About Time Number 3. There are probably two others prior to that. Up here on this table, you can look at it. And he said, I can find another copy if anybody wants to take that one. So you can do that too.
Yeah, and if you're interested in any of that, number one, you can visit the WilliamJamesAssociation.org website and learn a lot about it. And there's just actually a wonderful book that just came out of photographs of the prison arts programs that's going to be available very soon, and you can get that information through our website as well. This is going to be, again, making those connections that make it 2 minutes. Great. Okay. Santa Cruz provided a rich source of artists and support for the program at Soledad. The fact that William James Association was based in Santa Cruz also meant that Soledad benefited frequently from visiting artists and special programs. Page and Eloise's daughter, Ellen Grice Davidson, was the first manager of the prison project. After her retirement, Lori Brooks took over as executive director. Victoria Solsky taught visual arts at Soledad for over 10 years. Guillermo Aranda, a Watsonville muralist, first joined the arts program at Soledad through the recommendation of Eduardo Carrillo of UCSC. Nigel Sanders' self was a young actor with Shakespeare Santa Cruz when he was recruited to teach theater at Soledad. He expected great things from his students and was not disappointed. Barrington McLean, visual artist and sculptor, was an inspiring teacher at Soledad, working both in 2- and 3-dimensional mediums. Kenny Hill was recruited to teach classical guitar at Soledad. Based on strong student interest, Kenny used his luthiery experience to assist a student in building guitar. They went on to build guitars, like probably 50 guitars at Soledad that were distributed out to the people. And it was actually the inspiration for Kenny to start his own guitar building company, which now he runs out in Ben Lomond. Santa Cruz singer, songwriter Lacey J. Dalton, a.k.a. Jill Croston, performed benefit concerts at Soledad Prison and at San Quentin during the 80s. 2015, she was recruited to teach songwriting and guitar at High Desert State Prison. Eric Thiermann was recruited to document the program during its early years. His video, Art in the Prison Crisis, helped establish credibility for the program. Steve Wiesinger, Ken Arconti, Jeff Arnett. There are some other folks who worked in the program. The program was shut down in 2003 because of budget cuts by Gray Davis. In 2012, through the work of the California Lawyers for the Arts, Tim Robbins' theater program down in Los Angeles, and the William James Association, it was restarted. It's now exists at every prison in California, all 35 prisons. There are artists going in every week to teach art there. So, it's a wonderful program. You want me to read this in from Stephen Kessler?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a beautiful. Yeah,
Okay.
Stephen Kessler wrote something for Overlooking, and at the end of the concert, he read it. But this was the first iteration of that inspired poetry 3 weeks ago.
Right. Yes.
There's the first rendition that came out, I think, Sunday.
It was actually in the Sentinel. It was one of the very early columns he did. Yeah. It is past midnight, and Pacific Avenue looks oddly twisted. The dense foliage looks like the old Garden Mall. There's no place open, and I'd like a beer, so I stroll over to Front Street to see who's playing at the Catalyst. It must be 1973 or so, because Ogunookie is in its last set, and the dancers crammed in front of the bandstand have worked up a sweat, and the cowboys and bikers and hippies and grad students are stomping their boots on the boards of the old carriage house floor. The music is some kind of Boulder Creek bluegrass, blue as the smoke of cannabis leaves grown and burned in these hills, fiddle, guitar, bass, and banjo burning as if the musician's fingers are aflame, possessed of some ancient backwoods juju that rocks the big room with primal rhythms that move everyone, even the bouncers and bartenders who rule the place with the force of their studly cool, and the busgirls collecting the dregs of the downed pipes. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, next on the reading is Dan Phillips, who's reading from volume 4 or 5? 4, volume 4.
From volume 5.
Volume 5, all right. Here you go.
Okay. Well, I missed a lot of fun because I didn't get here until 1978. I was in Northern California, San Francisco, and Berkeley, having fun there. But really loved coming to Santa Cruz because I came from the Russian River area where my wife and I bought an old resort and fixed it up. And this was after taking off for Canada during the, just after the free speech movement and all the ruckus that was going on at UC. And after Reagan moved in and called the National Guard, I figured my time was up to be in Berkeley after graduating there sometime before. Well, I didn't graduate from there, but I was a graduate student there. So I came to Santa Cruz because it seemed like the best place to go to take refuge from the onslaught of the establishment, and I found that it was still pretty viable, and some sort of second generation in 1978. 78, this might be some of your background too, was a Renaissance time in Santa Cruz with everyone acting out their dreams and experimenting in new directions. I figured the best thing I could do was to take improv acting at Cabrillo to get to meet people in the community, because I knew very few. I knew Steve Wiesinger, who you mentioned in the prison project. He was actually a brother-in-law of mine, and but I knew very few people here in Santa Cruz. I figured going to Cabrillo and taking improv acting, I would meet somebody, and I was improvising my life as I was going on anyway. So I began doing stand-up comedy on Wednesday nights at the Art Center. And I think you remember that scene. It was quite a scene. It went on every week. Somebody would stand up. I did a whole bunch of bits myself. I was a Jewish Rastafarian with a skull cap and cornrow braids, and a Polish sewer worker, complete with hip boots and a 3-pronged fork, and who was going to run for president and fork President Reagan out of Washington. That was my platform. Forming a comedy group with other amateurs, and we did stay amateurs. We never made it really to be professional. I booked a successful performance at UC Davis, and my short-lived comedy career ended, however, with my performance at the other short-lived Copa Banana Comedy Club. I don't know if you knew about that one, in Capitola, where I made the mistake of performing 3 hugs a day, which was what I learned in Judy Slottom's improv acting class. It got me familiar with Santa Cruz. And it went like this: 3 hugs a day, that's the minimum. 3 hugs a day, not the maximum. 3 hugs a day. Start now. And we would rush around the stage and grab someone of the opposite sex and hug them, sometimes of the same sex. It didn't matter. It was all improv, acting. So anyway, I did this bit at the Copa Banana, and I incurred the wrath of the owner. He got really uptight with me, who, unbeknownst to me, was the originator of hug therapy. You know, there was an actual therapy. You know, to me, it's just something that we do naturally, right? But there was a therapy, and probably some therapists making money on the deal. He thought I was, this originator of hug therapy thought I was satirizing him. And anyway, I did my bit, and Ralph Peduto, well-known local impresario, was another name from the past, local actor and Hollywood extra, who had booked the gig, vehemently declared, I would never work in this town again, because I had insulted the owner, right? But I did act in his own play, Where's the Kitchen, with Mel Spivak, who was another comic actor, and I really enjoyed playing with him. He was really a great guy. Undaunted, I went on to act in local theater groups like Mountain Community Theater in their first production, Happy Birthday, Wanda June, and Cabrillo College and Wilma Marcus's A View from the Bridge. And with Irv Washkoff, I formed the Troubeniggas at Temple Bethel, produced and performed numerous Jewish-themed plays. Everybody then, it seemed, was into some form of self-improvement therapy, and I was no exception. In fact, I think that's why I came to Santa Cruz, to work on my image, or work on who I was. Get beyond image, you might say. I'll never forget a hypnotherapy group that was an offshoot of the Men's Sex and Power therapy. This was started in Berkeley, Men's Sex and Power. Do you remember that? Somebody was involved in that, I know. I played an angry father belittling. Anyway, it was a very interesting kind of nexus where a lot of groups split off from there and went to various cities. Part of the therapy was to form your own group wherever you came from. So we all converged on the theater in Berkeley, took this same therapy, and then we're supposed to go and form our own groups. And the one locally here in Santa Cruz, I think is still going, if I'm not mistaken. Does anybody know about it? Men's Sex and Power. Anyway, it was an eye-opener for a lot of people, including me. So that's why I got my therapy, I guess, instead of being in a commune. I don't know. But anyway, and anyway, here I was after I had taken this group, and I was just walking down the street in Santa Cruz, and some guy came up to me, and I remembered him. He wanted me to imitate his father so he could reduce his rage against his dad, because his dad called him a loser. And his dad was a truck driver, and he didn't want to be a truck driver. And his dad hated him because he thought he was too uppity and that kind of thing, going to college and all that. So anyway, this guy was full of rage. So I played his angry father and called him a no good you-know-what. And he just went ballistic and took 4 guys to hold him down. He was going to throttle me. I was so good. So I was an actor of sorts anyway. What? Too good. Yeah, too good. Right. So this guy came up to me on the street in Santa Cruz, and he said, Dan, he says, I have so much to thank you for helping me reduce my rage against my father. I couldn't believe it. This was like 10 years later, you know. Anyway, in 1980, I'll just gloss over a few things here and hit some other high spots. In 1980, I went back to my old love of teaching poetry, as an independent contractor in the schools, subsidizing elementary, middle, and high schools to bring me into the classroom through the California Arts Council. And I was the local head of CPITS, which is an organization throughout California that sends poets and poet teachers into the schools. So I did that, poets in the schools. And then I was hired with Patrice Vecchione as the first two poets for the Santa Cruz County Arts Council Spectra program in the elementary schools. So I did this from 1980 through 1983. I conducted over 30 student workshops in 20 different elementary, junior high, and high schools in Santa Cruz, plus a few in Monterey County. And with each workshop, we turned out a book. So the kids had something to be proud of and take home. And we had a reading of the book with each workshop. So I really enjoyed that. I had been a junior college teacher in Northern California, and I couldn't get a job right away at Cabrillo. I went into Mike's office and introduced myself, I remember. And I did take an interview, but I didn't quite make it at that time. So I figured this was great. This was being a poet in the schools, and I was really excited about doing it with the kids. And yeah, I'm going to wind it up. So as a writer-teacher, I benefited hundreds of students and promoted poetry in Santa Cruz. Together with Phil Wagner, a dedicated local poet, we launched the Bookshop Santa Cruz ongoing poetry series under the aegis of the National Writers Union for 5 years before Poetry Santa Cruz took over. So that was another, I think, high water mark. I did get a junior college job finally over the hill in San Jose, but carried on with my poetry teaching as a volunteer for my grandkids, especially in the schools they attended. So I just want to read this last little piece. It's about 10 sentences long. Okay, I consider myself fortunate to have come at a time when the arts in Santa Cruz were flourishing, and it's good to see there still are. You couldn't help dancing up the Pacific Garden Mall to the sounds of Don McCaslin and his group outside the old Cooper House on your way to Bookshop Santa Cruz. Then you could take the book of your choice to Cafe Pergolesi, run by our old friends from the 60s in San Francisco's North Beach, Judy and Frank Foreman, who I thought would be here today, but they were old friends from North Beach, for a cappuccino, and then see most everyone you knew or cared to meet. Maybe even were stimulated by the potent combination of good caffeine, literature, and conversation to write a poem. Since that Renaissance time in '78, I have done my most creative work here, and hopefully will keep on. So thank you very much.
You mentioned Ehrlich, Thiermann. Brother David is here. And David, you had a piece in what, number 1 or 2?
What's that?
You had a piece in one of our early ones, number 2? Or?
Yeah, what happened was there's some mention, I believe, in volume 1 or volume 2, where I was interviewing Ralph at India Joe's restaurant for about 10 hours about his life. And I forget which volume that's in, but you can always check that out. And then Ralph returned the favor and decided to interview me for his book. And I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you all for coming today. It's great to see all of you. And it's been a blessing to be part of this community for me. So what I thought I'd do is read you part of the interview that Ralph did on me. But first I got to start with a joke, which is that as it turns out, a mouse died and went to heaven. And God said to the mouse, "You've been such a good mouse, I'd like to give you a present." The mouse said, "Well, you know, I've always wanted to have a pair of roller skates." And about a month later, a cat died and went to heaven.
And God said to the cat, you know, you've been such a good cat, I'd like to give you a gift. And the cat said, you know, I don't need anything. I have Meals on Wheels. So, yeah. Yeah, ouch. This is on page 97 of volume 4. And I'll just read you a little bit from the interview that Ralph did on me up at his house in Bonnie Doon. We both live on Smith Grade. September 4th, 2018. And I'm here at home with David Thiermann. David, I look back over the tapes that you did interviewing me. I think it was 25 to 30 years ago, and there were 8 hours altogether. Here, if we try to cover the same ground in an hour, it will have to be carefully done. So I thought I would start with your childhood and then maybe fast forward up to the time you came to Santa Cruz. Most of the interviews in the past, I've asked the person to start with their arriving in Santa Cruz, but I'm very interested in the question of how you got to be the person that you are. So maybe you can start with where you were born and your family and your early childhood and stuff. And I answered, yes, I was conceived in New Jersey and born in Philadelphia in 1946. My parents were Quakers, and my father was working for the American Friends Service Committee, which is an interdenominational, non-sectarian service organization that was started by the Quakers. And my uncle was also working for them, so it was a big influence on my life. Ralph said, yeah, that was Philadelphia. I said, yeah, that's where their headquarters are. I lived in Chicago slums for about the first couple of years of my life, where my father was working, rehabilitating some homes there. And then we moved to Santa Monica. I grew up in Santa Monica, and my uncle continued to work for the American Friends Service Committee. He was running the Northern California division out of San Francisco, and then he went on to become their representative to the United Nations, and also handled all of their diplomats when he was living in Geneva for many years. So there was that influence with my family. And my father, as I was growing up, had a tree surgery company in West Los Angeles, but his real love was being involved with his service organization as an activist. Ralph said, what does a service organization usually do? And I said, well, they have all sorts of projects all over the world to help people to be of service. As an example, as I was growing up, I had the opportunity to work on a number of different Indian reservations when I was a teenager. Pala Indian Reservation, Morongo Indian Reservation. These were like summer work camps with other young people. And then I had the opportunity to go with a group of teenagers to Ciudad Victoria on the east coast of Mexico to help refurbish a church there as a summer project. Then went to Canada to help build a school in British Columbia. So the organization was a big influence on my life. And so just wanted to thank all of you for coming today. And I hope that at some point in time, we'll be able to come together to do volume 6, because I think what people have done so far, T. Mike Walker and Ralph Abraham have done a beautiful job on putting out HIP Santa Cruz 1 through 5. So thank you so much.
Thousands of hours of tapes have been gone over and put up on. I still have the online one running. So there's just all kinds of information and interviews, live interviews, wonderful stuff available through the bookstore, also online, which is one of the books or any of the books give that information on how to access it online. Maybe. We are hippies to the core. Thank you. All right. Well, next we have Rick Gladstone, who appears in some of our books under an alias of Rick Allen. If he takes off the mask, he's probably somebody else altogether. So we'll see. Thank you, Rick.
It's just me. I contributed a couple of pieces to this series, which I'm still amazed to be among such incredible company. I want to just quickly say this before I start reading, because I have to read quickly to get through what I said I'd do. I read through these books multiple times. Every story. It continually, every time I do it, just blows my mind. This is like a tapestry for me. I mean, if you grew up here, which I did, or in these mountains anyway, I can open any volume to anywhere and start reading and start making new connections that I missed the first 4 times I read it. Oh, you were there. Oh, that was at their place. Oh, my goodness, that was you? So on and so on. It's mind-blowing. I don't know of another thing like this. And thanks to Mike and Ralph and all the rest of the editors for doing this incredible document. And I just want to say also, just throw this out as I got the floor right now. Volume 2 is my favorite. I love everything I've read, the interviews, and so on and so forth. Volume 2 is my favorite, though, and for various reasons. How is everybody? How are you all doing? So, we're still alive and kicking. I used to live in the river flats, and my neighbor for years and years was a guy that most of you, if not all of you, knew, Peter Demma. And whenever Peter would come around up Campbell Street, and I'd be working in the garden with a friend, he'd be walking downtown. I'd say, "Pete, how you doing?" Pete would stop and look at me. He'd say, "I'll be all right." I want to read from Kenneth Koenig's Jazz in Santa Cruz. I think it's really nicely written, and I like to give the flavor of Santa Cruz. I mean, this is Santa Cruz we're talking about here. Jazz history in Santa Cruz reflects the cultural trends that helped shape jazz in general. Before the beat and hip generations of the 40s through the 60s, swing bands dominated popular music. The tunes these bands played and those sung by their crooners became standards and filled the airwaves. Jazz music, which had been steadily evolving since its inception around the turn of the century in New Orleans, had for the first time become part of the mainstream. In the mid-30s, swing bands such as the band of Gil Evans, who eventually became famous for his beautifully arranged recordings with Miles Davis, such as Sketches of Spain, brought his big band from Stockton for the summer to play at the newly renovated Capitola Ballroom. At the same time, other name bands, big bands such as Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Lionel Hampton, Artie Shaw, Glenn Miller, Harry James were playing to packed houses at the Coconut Grove Ballroom and the Casa del Rey Hotel on Beach Street in Santa Cruz, near the amusement park and boardwalk. This continued until the mid-60s. This is the 1950s. Coming on the heels of World War II, bebop, as developed in the mid-40s by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, represented a new and more progressive form of jazz. Big band music was primarily music for dancing, and these big bands played in the many large ballrooms all over the United States and throughout the world. On the other hand, bebop, with its sometimes frenetic, angular, and complex sounds, and its young, innovative, masterful improvising musicians such as Parker and Gillespie, as well as Bud Powell, Max Roach and Thelonious Monk, and Miles Davis, set the trend of playing a form of music primarily oriented for listening rather than dancing. They often played in smaller clubs with no dance floors. Bebop was embraced by the beat generation of the 40s and 50s. Bebop emphasized spontaneous self-expression rather than more structured big band music that it evolved from. The Beats, with their anti-conformist, free-flowing style, easily related to this new form of jazz. In On the Road, Jack Kerouac, while visiting San Francisco's Little Harlem, and for those of you in San Francisco, I was born in San Francisco, probably the Fillmore district, gushingly describes hearing a wild tenorman with a ball and horn across the way going, "Ee-yah, ee-yah, ee-yah," and the hands clapping to the beat and folks yelling, "Go, go, go, man, go." He goes on to describe entering a sawdust saloon and the proceedings of the evening's encounter with the jazz man in exquisite, loving detail for the next few pages. John Cleland Holmes wrote a jazz novel called The Horn, which was published a year later in 1958, in which he takes us into the life of a black jazz musician as well as into the life of the music. During the 40s up until the mid-60s, as many as 9 music clubs were open along Beach Street, featuring a wide variety of performers, including jazz musicians. Beach Street for a time became the musical heartland of Santa Cruz, especially from Memorial Day to Labor Day. The activity on the street back then was compared with Broadway or New Orleans, French Quarter. There were blues singers like Big Mama Thornton at the Beachcomber. Other clubs such as the Mambu Gardens, the Hi-Hat, the Casbah provided opportunities for jazz musicians to sit in and play bebop with the house band. In fact, during the years of World War II and the Korean War in the early 1950s, musicians assigned to Fort Ord would make the drive up to Santa Cruz on a regular basis to have an opportunity to play in the clubs along Beach Street. Many of these musicians later became famous in the jazz world. Lenny Niehaus, for example, who was a longtime musical director for Clint Eastwood's movies, was a regular in the clubs. Walking down Beach Street in these days, it's hard to believe that the area was so rich with music venues. Parking lots, pizza parlors, beachwear stores, and seedy motels line the street instead. One club, the St. Francis, became the opus de jazz, which finally became Monk's, named after owner Monk DeAnna. It stood where Beach Street Cafe is today. And I remember being in Monk's and when it was more folk guitar and stuff in like 64, 65. Some of the gals around town would be in there. Some of the gals. It stood where the Beach Street Cafe is today. In those days, you could even hear Dixieland jazz regularly played at the Dream Inn and on the boardwalk. This was part of the West Coast Dixieland revival of the 40s and 50s, spearheaded by Lou Waters and Turk Murphy up in San Francisco. The joint was jumping. For any of those of you who have been around long enough and know the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I'm from La Honda, Pescadero, every summer at the Boots and Saddles Lodge in La Honda, there were jam sessions, maybe 6 or 7 during the summer, and all these cats and kiddies would pour down from the city in the Bay Area into La Honda 10 years before Kesey showed up, and just the place was jumping. You can't believe it. Many of the finest black jazz groups came down on the weekends from Oakland because of the opportunities to play on Beach Street. Ralston Brown, a popular jazz drummer and vocalist who lived in Santa Cruz and worked for a number of years on Beach Street, reported that patrons would come in off the beach dressed in bathing suits, listen to the music and dance during the day, and then go home or to their motel, get dressed in their finest, and head back down to Beach Street for an evening of fine music and more dancing and revelry. At one time, one of the clubs even hosted Kenneth Patchen, the well-known poet, reading poetry to jazz. Another place to hear and play jazz music in this time was in Capitola Village. The Coffee Cabaret, opened in 1958, was the place to go after the clubs closed on Beach Street. It was said to be the only jazz coffee house with live entertainment between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The bands would start late, and the jam sessions often ended in the early morning the next day. This establishment lasted until the early 60s before it was closed because a noise ordinance was enacted, allegedly promoted by squares. There were plenty of squares around in those days too, more than hippies and heppers. In addition, in '54, the Saba Club and the Caribbean Ballroom were opened side by side in Capitola, replacing the old Capitola Ballroom. The Saba featured small groups, and the Caribbean had the big bands. They were decorated in the faux West Indies style, popular at the time, complete with many carved wooden tikis. The Saba burned down in 1957 and was not replaced. Mike, do I have 2 more minutes? This is the 60s. I wanted to take you through there up to the 70s, where it really takes off, and there's plenty of people here to know about that. But the 60s was interesting too. By the mid-60s, the scene began to change. This change parallels the shift from the beat culture to the hip culture. Growing up in the generation of the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Rolling Stones, the hip generation was prone to listen to rock and roll rather than jazz. Their taste in music was earthier, less intellectual. Once again, dancing rather than listening to music became favored, and rock and roll provided the dance music. In the latter part of the 60s and early 70s, some jazz musicians, with decreasing audiences and places to play, developed fusion jazz, thereby attempting to capitalize on the popular appeal of rock. As rock and fusion bands began to take over clubs on Beach Street, reportedly a rougher crowd moved in, and the old club owners, jazz fans themselves, closed up and moved elsewhere. The number of venues in San Francisco and Santa Cruz featuring jazz decreased. Fusion added the sophistication and complexity of jazz with its spontaneous improvisation and the interplay between musicians. From rock, fusion got its power, rhythm, and simplicity. Groups primarily used electronic, not acoustic instruments, rock rhythms and simple harmony. Rock fans were more likely to support fusion than jazz, or than jazz fans. Rock fans were more likely, many jazz musicians did not consider fusion real jazz and wouldn't play it. Others like Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, even Miles, took a different approach and figured out ways to make the music artistic and expand on the emotional and commercial appeal. Groups like the Miles Davis Group in the 70s, Weather Report, who played up at Town and Country in the 70s, and I was lucky to be in a band that opened for them, which is mind-blowing. The Yellow Jackets, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and Chicago transcended the jazz-rock cultural divide and became quite popular, even opening for rock bands at concerts. 2 more paragraphs. The big band scene at the Coconut Grove also started to fade in the mid-'60s and finally gave way to artists like Sonny and Cher, the Four Freshmen, and other more commercial pop music groups. And for a time, as jazz became superseded by rock music, many jazz musicians found themselves even playing in rock bands to keep active. However, jazz music remained alive in Santa Cruz area schools. In the late 60s and into the 70s, teachers Don Keller at Aptos High and Dave Leitz at Soquel continued to train students to play jazz. This foreshadowed a resurgence of jazz in Santa Cruz in the 1970s. So if you get volume 3 and finish reading this and go through the 70s and stuff, and all the amazing things, Lyle Cruz and Kawumba and all kinds of incredible high school players that became famous and so on and so forth, you'll finish off this part, Ray Brown, so on and so forth.
Went on to do the composition for David Bowie's last album, The Dark Star, and won international fame for that one. Doing really well. And if I remember, some of us remember sitting down at the old Cooper House outside, and what it was we could hear the band out there, and hearing Little Danny, who was 15 years old, just blowing everybody's brains out. Woo! And he just moved all the way. Have kids. So we have 2 more readers. Carolyn Lang is going to talk about parties. Oh, I didn't even know. Right. Here she is, and she's going to talk about one of the things that came out of this area that's so juicy and wonderful, the birth movement. Birth movement. That's where I met several people.
That's where I met T. Mike Walker, because I midwifed the birth of one of his children. And it's this book, I brought this over from, this is not mine. Somebody laid it out here. Is this yours, Mike? This book came out of the home birth movement that had an incredible explosion and beginning here in Santa Cruz County, simultaneously with other places in the United States and Canada. It's something that happened quite spontaneously and without a network, because as you mostly know, there was very little in the way of network at that time. Here in Santa Cruz, there were incredible numbers of people who were really involved in trying to make birth more humane. And one of them was Celeste Phillips. In Volume 3, Kate Boland, who is one of the quintessential home birth midwives here in Santa Cruz County, has a series of interviews that she did with some movers and shakers here in the county, and one of them is Celeste Phillips. Celeste was a registered nurse and an educator, and she became incredibly influential throughout the world in what is now called family-centered care. Because at the time that Celeste had her babies, families were not involved in care at all. And women were knocked out, babies were taken away from their mothers, and they did not even get to hold and see their babies, sometimes for days after the births. It was a truly inhumane period of time in our birth medical culture. And Celeste was really influential in changing that worldwide. One of the quotes that I got from Celeste in doing my homework for today, we need to recognize how important birth is. And that continues to be true. And we are continuing to be challenged because there are still many places that do not really honor and recognize how totally influential birth is in the life of people, in the life of families. Another of the people that Kate interviewed is Paula Holtz, and Paula was the first nurse midwife in Santa Cruz to get hospital privileges here in this county. She had to fight long and hard and with lawsuits in order to get them to give her privileges for plying a trade that she was completely qualified, trained and qualified and licensed to do. Paula grew in this county in the era of Ken Kesey and the acid tests and all of that. And among the things that that started her journey were marijuana and LSD, which she says was really clearly about consciousness raising. It was not at the time about getting stoned, about getting wasted. We used these drugs to grow. We used these drugs to learn. And among the things that somehow in that whole realm was that we needed to take hold of birth and claim it again as something natural and normal and functional that had meaning for the families involved. These drugs, she said, were about changing the world. They had to do with spirit, with self-sufficiency, with ecology, with alternative education, with holism, with the Back to the Land movement. I will add all the politics of the time, the incredible demonstrations and protests that were everywhere. And the women's health movement was certainly a great part of that, and the home birth movement became a part of that as well, and the midwifery movement. It was a simply wonderful, magical time with joy and innocence that could be found all over Santa Cruz and Northern California. And that joy involved having our babies. A quote that I got from Celeste in this that I wanted to just bring out: birth is where love begins. And I just loved that when I read that in volume 3. That's where Kate's interviews are. We also had the birth center. This book comes from what was the Santa Cruz Birth Center that was started by another of the midwives at the time named Raven Lang. And this was a book that she put together, a compilation of home birth stories in the early 70s. And it had also influence nationally and internationally in bringing awareness to the importance and essential needs and nature of what birth has to be for our world. I started my journey into midwifery in 1972 when I was in England, where midwifery never died off and where home birth never stopped. It did diminish, but it never stopped, as it did here in North America mostly. So I learned about midwives and home birth when I was there. When I came back, when I was living in Mill Valley, I discovered that it was alive and well and growing, and I jumped in with every bit of me. My story of my journey is in volume 5, and I'm not going to go into reading that here today. If you really want to read it, it's there. So I'm going to leave it with just the nub that what I found I needed to do about reclaiming birth in this world in Santa Cruz County and beyond came so much from, although I was not in Santa Cruz when I got my start in my journey. I moved here in 1975 for an apprenticeship. And it was all of those things that I just mentioned. I will add, it was a self-actualization. It was a time where we knew who we were and what we needed to become and what our world needed to be better. And that is what I think these books tell us over and over again. Thank you.
To conclude our section of this, I'd like to invite Ralph to step forward. Ralph Abraham, the initiator of the entire project. Without him, Ralph would not have been able to do it.
I can't say how happy this meeting makes me. So we were supposed to be here 2 years and 2 months ago. And considering the ongoing state of COVID-19, maybe we shouldn't be here yet. But we all decided to take the risk. And we also have, I think, half a dozen or so of our family are present on Zoom. So each person, there are 5 volumes published in the 5-year period from 2016. And everyone has a favorite volume. So my favorite volume is volume 1. And I'm going to refrain from reading, but I'm going to introduce the reading that I won't do. So I'm frequently asked, how did this all begin? And my usual answer is that I felt that people would be departing, and I wanted the stories recorded somehow. So some 20 years ago, we began a process of meeting together in groups like this for the purpose of telling our stories. We called them story circles. There were something like 20 story circles over a period of 10, 15 years. And right at the beginning, in 2002, I started to post the transcripts of the recorded stories on our website, which is ralph-abraham.org/1960s, 1960s. So after some years passed, when I realized that worldwide websites were not as popular as they used to be, I decided to reposition some of the postings as written material in books. And of course, we already had transcripts, so it was a simple matter to extract from the website and put them in books. So I always say we started with story circles, we posted transcripts on the web, and then we reformatted them as books. And hence now 5 volumes, and maybe someday 6, I'm not sure. We already have 1 or 2 contributions for volume 6. But this simple story is not actually true. It was true only for volume 1. Volume 1 resulted in a book launch and reading like this, which was well attended, not here, but in the gallery. And many people there said, well, I have a story too, and they did. And so volume 2 was born not from the website, but from the direct contribution of people sending in original writings. So this is maybe the reason that Volume 1 is my favorite volume, is because it has the oldest material from 2002. And of the dozen or so chapters, 6 of the authors have already passed on. So my intention today was read from one of the writers no longer with us. And I chose Peter Dema because I felt he was the most directly inspiring figure of all the ones represented in Volume 1. That might not be true, but this was my feeling. I also had great regard for Leon Tabori and Joe Lazowski and the people who have passed, that thankfully their stories are recorded in Volume 1. So I'm not going to read from Peter Dema's interview. Most of the chapters in Volume 1 are interviews that I did, and also published the transcripts in interview format. So Ralph asked, so on, and Peter answered, thus and so, as David Thiermann has indicated. And Peter Dema, in his interview in Volume 1, explained how the idea of the hip pocket bookstore came into the minds of him and his pal Ron Bevert. And as partners, they started the Hip Pocket Bookstore, and that was the organizing center for a lot of what followed. For example, the first acid test was peopled by individuals who wandered into the Hip Pocket Bookstore and found out that this acid test was about to happen, and over they went. It was a very very crucial stimulus in the hip movement in Santa Cruz, which is recorded in these 5 volumes. And particularly for me, because meeting Peter Dema was one of the key factors that that turned me from Princeton University to UC Santa Cruz. It's because of Peter Dema and a few of his cohorts that I decided that I wanted to move from the East Coast to Santa Cruz. So that's maybe an incentive to have a look in Volume 1. No, I introduced the reading that I'm not going to read because time is late. Yes, all 5 volumes are on the table there. It's my inventory that I have been saddled with for 2 years and 2 months, and one of my ideas for this gathering, and I've been saving the books all this long time in order to unload them. So we're having a warehouse overstock sale of all my inventory is on the table there, and you can have them for a price of $0 or voluntary donation. They're also, of course, available at Bookshop Santa Cruz and online. So, thank you.
So that ends the saga of volumes 1 through 5 for now. There may be a possibility of continuance, but that depends on other people who are going to be able to step up and continue. Others of us are in the process of getting things ready for checkout. So, it's just the time of our lives. So you have to know where you are in your life. It's important before you take any big new task. But we have a couple of other people here who have wonderful books to read and opportunity to share and make a part of all this from the beginning. So, Jami Cassady, would you like to share with us your story?
I almost wore my tie-dye vest.
That's Counterculture Santa Cruz right there. Yes. Hello, hello. You probably all know I'm Neil Cassady's middle child. Very proud of that, but also very proud of Santa Cruz. My dad worked at the Hip Pocket, and it kind of brought a lot of the counterculture to Santa Cruz because he actually provided marijuana to the communes up in the mountains, huh, Holly? And it was quite a character on and off all over. I wrote a piece for, I think it was volume 4, about the barn. The barn gave me a gift. Everybody knows the barn. You could see it from the freeway, and there it was, spelled out in big letters, the barn. I loved it. I would dress up in a paisley V-neck shirt with belled sleeves, the one I shared with my younger brother, John. It was the only item of hippie clothing we owned, so we traded off. This was 1967, and my boyfriend Peter's band was the house band. I cannot believe Peter and I went to the barn every weekend. I was 17. I met Peter through my younger brother, John, who was in a lot of bands in the mid-60s in Santa Cruz. The first of which was with his good childhood buddies, Mike, Dave, Mark, and Peter. Peter was the drummer. We were all from Los Gatos, Saratoga area, but their band played a lot in Santa Cruz. I was a year older than John and his friends. Peter was closer to my age. When I stopped dating Mike, Peter and I got together. Peter then became the drummer for Bubble with Ken Kraft, Alan Smith, and Bubble became the house band at the barn. Peter would come to my house in Los Gatos every Friday and Saturday night in his VW bus with all the instruments in the back. I remember sitting in the living room by the fire at my mom's house on Bancroft Avenue, waiting and watching out the window for the bus to come and pick me up. We had to drive over Highway 17 in the VW bus with all the stuff in the back to get to the barn. I cannot believe my mom allowed me to do that. Yeah, but she did. But we did it. We'd cruise in that bus from Los Gatos to Scotts Valley, and that was a crazy thing to do. I mean, you can die a horrible death on that highway, Highway 17. We were young and smoking pot and drinking, and then for 25 minutes we navigated through the twists and turns of the Santa Cruz Mountains. No seatbelts back then, but hey, let's go. Everybody went to the barn. It was a magical place with that Avalon or Fillmore vibe. There was a big bar on the main floor, and up top was a huge dance floor where the band played while the lights zoomed. When we went to the barn, I'd be gone all night. It was an all-night happening, especially for the house band. Peter would go upstairs and do his band thing from the moment we arrived. I'd wander around or sit at the bar. I remember hoisting my butt up on the bar stools. But I can't remember what I drank. I know that I hated beer back then. I also know that the barn was always a warm, welcoming place. There were antiques all over. I think they were leftovers from when it was the flower shop. Ed Nort, right? There was something to notice on every wall and in every corner. There was so much room in there. You could sit in a chair and read. And I'm sure people were taking LSD, but I didn't know about that then. To me, it was just very comforting to be there. I felt part of the whole at the barn. Maybe it was because I was the house drummer's girlfriend. Maybe it was because I was there every weekend among fellow free spirits. Maybe it was because I was on my own, away from the eagle eyes of my mom. And maybe it was because I knew the owner. Leon Tabori and I were tight. I didn't know much about his personal life at that time. I didn't know he was a Holocaust survivor, didn't know he had kids or was married, but he'd been a part of my life since I was 10 years old. Leon was family to me because of his connection to my dad, Neil Cassady. When my dad was serving time in San Quentin, Leon was his psychologist. They became really good friends, and Leon wanted to continue to help Dad after parole. He did, and he got fired for it, being with a parolee. So he lived with us for a while at the Los Gatos house. Mom always welcomed in the guys connected to Neil, and there was always a party on Bancroft Avenue. It was just my reality to have people coming in and out of the house. Whether it was Leon, Big Daddy Nord, Farrell and Getty, Kesey, Allen Ginsberg, there was no invitation required. The guys just showed up, and Mom tried to make everyone happy with pizza and a gallon of wine. I'm pretty sure Mom never went to the barn. By 1967, she was really involved in the community, creating her own life after she and Dad divorced. Dad was on his own too, but after the divorce, he'd still come to the Los Gatos house to rejuvenate. He'd sleep, and Mom would fix him soup. I remember she'd tell him, "Get down off that mountain in La Honda and get some rest," she would say. I can't recall if I had seen Dad at the barn any time before that one time at the end of 1967. I guess it's possible since the further bus was often parked outside, but I really only have one distinct memory. I met Dad on the main floor. He stumbled in, and I noticed him right away. "Let's go downstairs, away from the scene," I said. I could tell he had that look, like he needed help. So I said, "Come on, Dad, let's go." He crawled into one of those little catacomb-like spaces with the pillows and the blankets downstairs. I followed. I had never gone into one of those before at the barn, but that night I followed Dad to that place where we shut out the world, and it was just the two of us lying there together. He was gaunt with stubbled chin, and I knew he was out of it and hallucinating. But he was also lucid, and it felt so healing because despite it all, I knew he knew who I was. He was moving his head back and forth, up and down, and as he looked all around with those acid eyes, he saw me. He recognized me. Eventually, he settled down, and we just hugged and hugged. I felt so much love. Then he fell asleep. So I carried that tender moment with me as I walked up the stairs to hear the band and take in the light show. I never saw my dad again. About a month later, his life would end near the tracks just outside San Miguel. I didn't realize it at the time, but I know now that our souls were saying goodbye that night. So while I am certain that the barn was a gift to lots of flower children of that era, the barn gave me a gift for which I am forever grateful. That's where I got to say goodbye to my father. But I also wanted to say, yay, 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 yay. But just amazing group. And I'm so happy to be a part of it. Thank you. Thank you, Ralph.
So her book by one by her mother, Carolyn, and another, which I don't know what that is. That's,
Oh, it's the Holy Grail?
the Holy Grail.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to say, Randy put together this whole thing about hip Santa Cruz counterculture. It's got pictures of the barn and the hip pocket. Anyway. Not for sale, just yeah.
Hi, did you have something you wanted to read and share with us?
I would read about Bridge Mountain or something about the movie community, but my books are in storage right now, so I couldn't find
Which
something
book was
good.
Bridge Mountain, and I had a mark on one of the books.
It's in 3 or 4.
And I heard 3 and I heard 4. So I heard 5.
4.
Over here, right? 4 is over here. Comfortably put it in my ear.
Give me glasses. You can see. My glasses.
It's 3, page 3
Is
and
it
11.
3? Okay.
Page 3 and
I was
11.
3 on that.
Well, I've got your book right here, Mike.
You got it in your hand.
I got it.
Oh, okay.
We're good.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
So yeah, I moved to Santa Cruz in 1965 with my parents. They liked to go to Bridge Mountain on the weekends, and we were in tow. My brother and I. We would come down before we moved here and go to Bridge Mountain, and it was a wonderful experience. I was young. I was only 13 or 14 at the time, so I embraced it. My brother was not so open to it, but so I did write in the book here about it, so I'll read it. There was a magical place nestled in the redwood forest high atop a mountain in Ben Lomond, California. Traveling way up Alba Road, turning right onto a small wooden bridge, and then onto a road with redwood foliage carpeting the ground beneath the majestic redwood trees. Approaching a large redwood lodge, graced with sunlight, you felt excitement, like you had arrived home. Originally called Darboa, which is Bohemian phrase meaning gift of God, Darboa became the center for Bridge Mountain Foundation, which was purchased and incorporated by Ruth and Preston Prescott in 1958. From 1958 to 1975, Bridge Mountain became a spiritual growth center, probably one of the first in California, as Esalen was not established in Big Sur until 1962. Ruth Prescott was a visionary sculptor and watercolor artist, and Preston was a well-known sculptor and a high school art teacher in San Jose. He exhibited his sculptures in many places, including the De Young Museum in San Francisco. Ruth's vision was to have a place called the University of Living Arts. Her vision was to have a place where all were equal in a community of wisdom, creativity, and kindness, to radiate bright light out into the world. In 1943, the Prescotts had first purchased 20 acres, which included a beautiful amphitheater, and built a home and sculpture studio nearby. The amphitheater was an ancient Indian healing ground, a sacred grove where spirits abide. Darboa was originally built in 1940 by a wealthy Czechoslovakian man from Norway. It was used as a guest house to certain friends in the movie industry and for movie stars. The Bridge Mountain Lodge could sleep up to 30 guests. There was the main lodge, and then there there were rooms off of the main lodge. Ruth and Preston's dream was to create a school where people would learn from their own inner wisdom through deep relaxation and the arts. Kay Ortman, another creative and forceful individual, met Preston in 1953 in Chico at a camp farthest out gathering, which means going further out with Christ. So it was kind of a religious organization, but went farther into really more growth. It seems to have moved into more of a spiritual realm and away from religion. Preston invited Kay to come and see how special the land was in Ben Lomond. Kay liked what she saw. Kay had developed her own program using classical music as a carrier wave to liberate people of blocks and self-limitation, which would free them to be their own authentic selves. While in the amphitheater, the first day of her visit, Kay received a long transmission on how to use music as medicine. She could see how her program would fit into the Preston's dream. She bought a home on Alba Road and called it the Great House, and moved her son and husband to the mountain. Soon, Kay Ortman began the morning program with guided relaxation exercises in the large upstairs room at Bridge Mountain. After the relaxation exercises, classical music would be played. Kay Ortman was a pioneer in the fields of relaxation exercises and movement to music. The classical music was used as a carrier wave to lift blocks out of people's bodies by also combining massage and the arts. She used writing, colored chalk, clay, and movement to music to free people from their blocks. Also, she helped them open to greater freedom in their own creative field. As one of the early practitioners of these methods, Kay Ortman was in the vanguard of the holistic healing field. She grew up in London, where she studied music, dance, and movement to music. She also studied at Rudolf Steiner's School of Eurythmy and worked with them for 2 years until she decided to leave and create a program of her own, which she called Wellsprings. Ruth Prescott passed away in 1964 when she was 72 years old. Papa Wurtzbach had purchased a cabin near Preston's home. Papa did the gardening and maintenance for Bridge Mountain. His wife, Mama Wurtzbach, was a spiritual woman who led meditation groups and worked with young women in the community. They had 2 creative daughters, Liz, a spiritual young woman, and Dina, an accomplished artist. When Liz's husband passed away suddenly, Preston invited Liz and her young son, Alan Ashby, to move into his home on the upper floor. Liz helped cook and care for Ruth before she died. A woman named Carolyn, who also shared the upstairs, had later married Preston in 1965. I first arrived in Bridge Mountain with my brother and my parents in 1964. I was 13 years old. We lived in San Mateo, and from the advice of a marriage counselor and psychologist named Dr. Jack Downing, my parents began their travels to Bridge Mountain. I don't believe I ever met Ruth Prescott. Dina did teach me watercolor early on, and she had learned from Ruth. Liz Ashby became the director of Bridge Mountain and took over Kay Ortman's responsibilities of leading the morning relaxation exercises. Liz was a clairvoyant and beckoned guests into her private, warm, sunny room for one-on-one insight and counseling. Jim Creighton arrived at Bridge Mountain and married Liz. There are so many people involved in the story and the history of the mountain. There were residents living there who were friendly greeters, which made you feel at ease when coming into the new experience. Paul Snyder is one that stands out in my mind, a loving, creative, spiritual soul, and a haircutter. He would cut my hair. The very large upstairs room at Bridge Mountain had a stone fireplace at each end and beautiful, smooth, shiny, dark wood floors, wonderful for dancing on in your bare feet or socks. There were moving blankets folded and stacked in one corner so each person could have a floor mat for the relaxation exercises. The long wall had glass windows and doors all the way across. Looking out to the southeast was the view of redwood forests across the distant San Lorenzo Valley. If you walked out through the glass doors, you would find yourself on a long patio deck with expansive views in three directions, old movie star-style lounge furniture from the 1940s. On the other side of the large room, an opposite long redwood wall, there was a door to the art room. There were only two types of medium, clay to sculpt with and large colored chalks to draw with on large sheets of newsprint. The blank newsprint was clipped onto smooth masonite board. The door was always kept closed, and when you were being creative in that sun-drenched room, you had to remain silent. Another door on the long wall went out to the inner sunny courtyard where there were beautiful flower gardens. The third door led to the guest quarters. Only donations were accepted at Bridge Mountain to pay for workshops, retreats, and spiritual counseling, accommodations, and food. I think that's all I'm going to read right now. It goes on and on. I just wanted to say it was a very special place for me, being young and really being able to grow into a teenager and an adult. It really changed my life.
I can only add to that it actually saved my life. 1964, I had just quit the police department. I had been very much on the edge of suicide, and my therapist, whose name was Dr. Harman, she told me, "Get your ass to Santa Cruz, to Bridge Mountain." I said, "Never heard of the place." She said, "It will do you well. Spend a weekend there. Just go there. Don't even think about it. Do it." So I went, and I came back revived and reinvigorated, and realizing, hey, I'm okay. It's all right. We can live our lives. You make a lot of mistakes, and you atone for them, and you move forward, and that's how we live. And it really helped pick me up. And in that quiet room where you said no quiet, it was one of the first times in my life I'd ever gone into a room to do something creative, and it's really quiet. It was terrifying. I didn't even write anything, not a word. For an hour, I just sat there terrified. I walked out feeling just totally relieved. Like, oh, good, I didn't have to say anything. Good. All right, and I'm not going to say anything more. Thank you all for being here. God bless you. And please introduce yourselves to each other. There are books for sale. There are books for free.